Hi, my name is Jonathan. I'm the Director of Communications at the Integral Cinema Project, which is a research initiative started by my friend and colleague Mark Allan Kaplan to kind of investigate the link between consciousness and media. He is the leading expert in the application of integral theory to the cinema and has a lot of great theories and ideas about media and what makes it work and what makes it powerful. Just wanted to let you guys know that we are teaching a course. Really, he's teaching it and I'm just co-faculty. It's all his work. And it's a course called Transformative Media Creation and Reception. We're teaching it at Campus Co-Evolve, which is a new website started by George Poor, who's a pioneer in the fields of collective intelligence and visionary leadership. And we're teaching this course, and I recommend you check it out if you're interested at all in learning how to make your media more powerful or just understanding how media works. But in the meantime, Mark got a lot of requests from people saying, can you just kind of give us a background on where we are now as a culture, as a society, as a world? What's kind of our situational assessment that you could give us about why we have the problems we have? And so we decided to do this video. It's about 28 minutes. Hopefully it's worth your time because I think Mark really digs into how our technologies are 4 stages of consciousness ahead of some of our collective intelligence. And so we have unprecedented problems, but also unprecedented opportunities with media. And so we hope you'll check out the video and also check out the course if you're interested in following up. Go to campuscoevolve.org. You can see the link at the end of this video, or you can Google campuscoevolve.org and look for the Transformative Media course. There's other fantastic courses there as well, including one on befriending complexity, which is all about complexity theory. So really interesting stuff, and we hope you'll check it out. Thanks. Welcome to this discussion of the big picture of the now. I'm Jonathan. This is Mark Allan Kaplan from the Integral Cinema Project and many other things. And we're here to talk about Mark's analysis, in a way, of where we really are now as a species, as a society, as a culture, and why we have the problems we have. So if you want to take it away, Mark.
I kind of accidentally came upon this through my research into the coevolution of the moving image, consciousness, culture, and society. I was mapping the relationship and seeing how they affected each other and see if I could find evidence of this coevolution. And I did, pretty clear evidence. But what I also discovered were these bigger patterns going on that were connected with what I was seeing out in the world in this moment. And what I was seeing, these patterns I was seeing, was also being confirmed to me from other sources. So people in integral theory, in spiral dynamics, in systems theory, in complexity theory.
Evolutionary theory.
Evolutionary psychology, evolutionary biology. All of these fields are coming in with similar observations. And so this kind of helped confirm what was going on for me. And it gave me a big picture of what's going on, which has really helped me and really kind of shifted my whole purpose and intention and how I am in the world right now. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people have asked me about this, and I wanted to kind of
figure we should make a video just to kind of explain what this is. So the first thing, for those who aren't really familiar with this, is that we evolve through structures of consciousness. We got to just dive right into this. These are different than states of consciousness like happiness and sadness. Those are states. Structures are more structural. They're in your brain. And we evolve through these structures from archaic, magic, mythic, rational, pluralistic, and integral. Most people now that we're talking about really are in the mythic, rational, pluralistic, integral. Those are the ones that really concern us.
Yeah.
So we can talk about those a bit. Mythic.
Yeah. I just want to also say, I mean, most of us understand what structures of consciousness are. If we're parents, we see our children as we raise them, they go through different stages. Mm-hmm. And these are actually evolving through different structures of consciousness. So we see that in children. What we don't realize is that we can continue evolving past childhood into adulthood, and there's more advanced stages. Mm-hmm. What's also important to understand is that these stages are not only inside of us, they're reflected in everything we do and create, from our tools, technology, our cultures, our societies, our systems. Everything comes from these, and so there's parallels to these evolutionary processes from ourselves, our relationships, our cultures, and our systems, our technologies. Mm-hmm. So, for example, the mythic stage of development or structure of consciousness is also associated with traditional or conservative thinking. And the rational is obviously connected with rational, objective, scientific, industrial, all of that. And the pluralistic is connected to subjective reality, understanding that it's not just objective truths out there, but we have subjective realities and subjective stuff like that, and relativity comes into play there. So those are kind of the major vying cultural structures of consciousness we have going on right now. And then the integral is the one that's coming online some more. We're seeing it come up in various situations and different players here in the United States. There's a few candidates who are actually speaking from this higher perspective, who are trying to see the big picture, which the integral is that stage where we try to see the big picture, and that's where we're coming from, hopefully right now, is
Hopefully right now.
seeing the big picture here.
Right, trying to see all the other stages. So just to unpack those a little bit more, in the mythic structure you have values like duty, valor, loyalty, honor, which are good values. They just emerge during the mythic structure.
Right.
They can become pathological because you also see things very black and white.
And
so
us
that
and them.
tendency to see us and them and black and white is a pathology of the mythic structure. And you have to transcend that in order to see that people aren't black and white, that everybody, it's not exactly pluralistic, but you at least understand that everybody maybe is entitled to a fair amount of equality. You know, the Constitution emerged out of the beginning of the rational.
Yeah, the rational is where equality comes in.
It begins, right?
It begins. So when it comes online, we start at the rational stage. We recognize that inequality, slavery, all of those things are now understood as not cool. It's like, it is, okay, this is not
Right.
cool. So that is that transition.
Right. And the rational can also become pathological too as it transitions to the next stage. So each stage can become pathological.
Yeah, like we see in the current form of capitalism, the idea that the bottom line for everything is short-term profit, and that's above the health and well-being of people, planet,
Because you're not connected to the environment, to the planet.
to communities
Not
and all
really
that.
thinking
Yeah.
about it, right.
So
So
it
there's a
becomes
lot of
very
ways.
self-destructive. So that's a pathology for that stage.
Right.
Then we get to pluralistic, which is a lot of the positives of pluralistic is recognizing subjective experience as valid. That's important.
Yep. And parsing equality, I would say, more drilling down into the sexual revolution and the civil rights movement and all these things which really emerged.
Yeah, and actually this is where true empathy comes online for us. When we're at the pluralistic, we could actually empathize with people who are not like us. But that capacity is harder for the earlier structures.
Right. I mean, it happens, obviously.
It
People
happens.
Empathize at all stages.
Like, for example, at the Mythic, you could empathize with people in your group.
In your group, right. But not so much with people outside your group.
Right. And in the rational, you could empathize with people who are part of your social system because it becomes sociocentric. Sociocentric is your society,
Is your
which is your
society.
nation.
Nations, right.
So it's nation-centric. So if you're part of my nation, then I can feel you. And then when you get the pluralistic, it's global-centric. So you can empathize with all of humanity.
Right. And again, that can get into a pathology of pluralism as well, in which you begin to say, well, all truths are relative, and then you begin to lose the ability to distinguish between
What's true and what's not
true
true.
and what's not true, or what's a higher truth. And
And
so,
like right now, a lot of the talk about being overly PC is part that there is elements in our society that have become pathologically pluralistic and like wanting,
what's sometimes referred to as cancel culture, that if somebody says something or tweets something that's insensitive, their whole life should be canceled because they said something insensitive, rather than giving them a chance to either explain or just apologize, say, I didn't realize that was insensitive. And
Yeah.
so that kind of balance. So there's these happen. And then the integral stage, those where hopefully you see all the earlier stages and you realize which one is appropriate for the situation.
Yeah.
So which
Okay.
gets us to the root of what our problems now are.
Yeah, so now that we understand that a little bit, we could go into it. So, where we are right now, according to my research and according to the research and observations from these other areas, is we are at a evolutionary turning point. Everything we're seeing from Brexit to the election of Donald Trump in the United States to what was going on in Brazil, both with the elections there, but also with the Amazon, climate change, the struggle with trying to deal with that, all of that is part of this. And the great inequality, the mass migrations, all of this is all connected. So what this is that the last major transition of this magnitude we were in was the Industrial Revolution. All right, and then at that point, when the Industrial Revolution was happening, our collective consciousness, the center of gravity in our cultures, was at Mythic, and our technologies were coming out of a rational construct. And that helped to, over the 200 years that we've had of the Industrial Revolution or so, what happens is as those technologies became spread out and everyone started using them, they actually helped us evolve to rational.
From Mythic.
From Mythic.
So feudalism was a mythic system, and it was stable for 1,000 years, hundreds and hundreds of years, so it was a stable system. Then these technologies came on board that began the Industrial Revolution.
Which then
suddenly the technologies are more advanced than the culture, but the culture got dragged kicking and screaming, although it was a tough transition. A lot of people suffered during that shift to the Industrial Revolution.
But we have to understand here that this was just one stage off. The technology was only one stage ahead.
Right.
And it was still rough, but it was just one stage, which is kind of what happens. This used to be the norm, that a stage would get pretty solid, like the Mythic stage actually had, like you said, 1,000 or more years to kind of establish itself and become solid. Well, the Industrial Revolution at this point is only a few hundred years old. It's a baby. But we started to evolve through it, and culture started to get more into, we went from feudal states to nation states. We started to shift away from slavery, struggle away from slavery, and we're still kind of caught in its, grips in many ways.
And it's after waves.
And after waves are still, still some of its residual shadows that we haven't, really cleared yet. But the problem here is that when the information age came upon us, it was only a few hundred years of the rational industrial age. So it didn't have a lot of time to solidify. Right? So we have our structures in our society pretty solidly in the rational industrial. We have nation states and all that, but we still have very strong mythic elements in our cultures that are vying for power in these systems with rational and pluralistic people and power brokers.
But the technologies, the information age is more pluralistic technology, especially the internet.
Yeah, so the internet is a pluralistic technology.
It connects people all around the world. It is global by its nature. It is decentralized by its nature. It's not nation-state centric.
Right. So this is senses. Right. So, for example, now Facebook has how many billions of people?
Billion people or more.
Right. And in every country all over the world. So in a way, it's become an entity. It's beyond what nation states are. It's a kind of a collective community.
Right.
It's a global community. Anyways, but at that point, our systems were rooted in the rational industrial, and they didn't have time to mature enough to be ready to deconstruct to meet the new age. So it was just grafted on top of it. So, for example, in the United States, if you go into a government agency, let's say, for example, social services, and you have a problem, and you tell them what your problem is. If it doesn't fit into A, B, C, or D,
they can't help you.
They can't help you, and they have to find these workarounds. So you've got pluralistic employees trying to figure out how to work the rational industrial system. So then let's go ahead and say that right now then, with the information age, we were 2 steps behind in terms of culture, because culture, the center of gravity of our culture is actually a tug of war between mythic, rational, and pluralistic.
Right. So we do have that very huge mythic element in America, all the sort of evangelicals, all the people who are very patriot-centric in that way, which you would say nation state, but that's very much an us-them kind of perspective.
Right.
In a lot.
Nationalism is part of that. That's a hybrid of mythic and rational. So we've got like this hybrid situation going on.
And pluralistic technology is happening.
Right. And now let's make it even more complicated, because our technologies have accelerated beyond that. Then when we got the smartphone, which is an integral technology because it integrates other functions and technologies into a whole, we don't realize, but that when we're using these smartphones, we are helping our consciousness kind of head into those zones. And so we're there, and now that has become widespread. And now our technologies are actually moving into the higher areas beyond integral with these kind of transhuman, trans-technology technologies happening, where the line between human and tech is going to start to blur very soon.
Right.
It already is. So that is 4 stages, that technology is 4 stages ahead of the mythic structure, which still has a lot of political power. So if you could feel the tension in the system, you've got technologies moving at this breakneck speed, with culture stuck at a war between mythic, rational, and pluralistic, while the technologies are in all those and then beyond. Do you understand now what's going on in terms of, for example, in the US, the presidential election that we had with Donald Trump? A lot of people were feeling we needed to change course. We couldn't do the same that we were doing. And the only people that were kind of speaking to that in our presidential primaries was actually Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders on the 2 sides, on the 2 polarized sides. And regrettably, the Democratic establishment and the media couldn't see what was happening. And they were trying to stick with the old system. Now, this is an important point to have, that systems naturally try to keep themselves stable. And people in those systems don't realize, but they are acting from there. There's a social contagion.
Arranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. It's that
Right.
thing of being in denial about what's happening. And
Right. So the Democratic Party and our media, our corporate media, weren't able to see what was going on. And so they shut down Bernie Sanders. And all we had speaking to that unconscious inner kind of yearning or realization that something had to change was Donald Trump for us. And if you add that, the technologies that were being used to help us deconstruct were happening at the same time. So we deconstruct in terms of we were being shown how our media was no longer trustworthy. How all of these things that we have felt was like stable isn't. And Donald Trump is part of that. He is kind of, he is a product of this systemic problem. He is coming off of our holding to these old systems in a pathological form. So we have pathological mythic, pathological rational, and pathological pluralistic all happening at the same time. And it's all deconstructing, which this is supposed to happen. We are supposed to be deconstructing our old systems, because as systems evolve, the old system has to deconstruct for the new system to come online.
And it has to deconstruct for the shadow to emerge as well.
Right.
As you mentioned before, we have a lot of shadow work that sunlight being the best disinfectant, you have to go backwards on the spiral sometimes in order to go forwards on the spiral, according to spiral dynamics.
Right. So, because we have this huge gap, we have to deal with all these shadows. And the election of Donald Trump and the Brexit thing and what's going on in Brazil, all of those are pulling up our shadow. And we have to face our shadow and deal with it collectively. So that's all part of this process. So if we start looking at these things as, all right, everything's falling apart, but it's part of the process. These darker forces are coming online, but that is part of the process too, because we have to deal with the root causes of what's going on here.
But I think we also have to understand that people will retreat to mythic as they become less stable and as they become less secure. So one of the ways to help move people forward is to also help people be more comfortable, more secure. Food, shelter, the basics like that. You know,
absolutely, but the trick here is that the mythic structure, at least the current mythic structure, has a pathological attachment to this warped idea of survival of the fittest. They don't realize that what survival of the fittest means is that whatever species is most fit to the environment they're in is the species that survives it. It's not the most strong or the most,
right.
powerful.
Well, in some cases it is.
In some cases it is,
depending on what happens.
But according to the most recent evolutionary theory, it's actually the species that can act as a whole, collective, in a healthy way that has the edge.
Right. Well, this gets us to collective evolution. What we're moving into with integral systems is more of mesh networks and collective intelligence.
But the problem is that to bring in equality, to bring in more people from struggling and suffering and from limited resources into the higher areas, we have to deal with that shadow of the mythic basically saying survival of the fittest. Because they believe that. They actually, a lot of them believe that if you're not strong enough to survive, then you're not meant to survive. But actually, that's not actually what is meant by that. But, anyway, so that's kind of why it's a problem of consciousness. I mean, all these actions that we can take, we have all the capacities. We have the technologies. We have the resources to fix every problem we have, but we don't have the political will, or the consciousness, or the or the awareness, the understanding of it, free of our pathologies in order to do it. And so that means that every problem is a problem of consciousness. And so here's the bottom line for me. What I discovered, and what a lot of people discovered, is that the coevolutionary system between consciousness, culture, and society, and our technologies and all that is out of whack. So out of whack, and in terms of our cutting edge technologies are 4 stages ahead of the lowest structure that has power to control things. And so that is the root of our problem right there. That's the big picture, this gap. We're supposed to only have a 1-stage gap between our collective consciousness and our technologies.
But as things have accelerated,
we have not been keeping up.
Right. You can almost pin that to the atomic bomb in 1945. It's when people really felt that our technology had advanced so far past where our center of gravity was.
Yes.
People were nervous even then. They understood that.
Yeah, that was the beginning of that
kind
recognition that, oh shit, we're moving.
So we're thinking, so we have this big problem, but we're thinking that one of the solutions to this is through media.
Yeah, well, one of the things that my research has kind of shown is that our mass communication technologies, from movies, film, television, video games, the internet, virtual reality, all of these communication technologies have the capacity to help us evolve our consciousness. They already have been helping us co-evolve. Okay, so they have the capacity, and they have the capacity at a scale that could actually help us. Because right now, Traditionally, it's estimated in integral theory and spiral dynamics and other developmental psychology theories and all that, that for adult development through a stage of a structure of consciousness, on the average takes anywhere from 5 to 10 years if people are actually striving to do it, if they're working on it. For those who aren't, you could be in arrested development for the rest of your life. You can just stay there.
Right.
Because the center of gravity of the culture is what pulls you up. And right now, our culture's center of gravity is split between the three. So we could stop at any of those three, because that's where the center of gravity of our culture is, in the United States, and probably a lot of other Western countries. So we have that really the technologies that are so advanced is our only hope, to use them to accelerate our consciousness. So if we could take our accelerated technologies and focus them on helping our consciousness evolve faster, we have a shot. We have a shot at doing this with a lot less suffering. Now, we may survive this coming transition that we're in if we don't do this. But if we don't try this, the odds of huge human suffering in the next 10 to 20 to 30 years is huge. It's like, you know, and as system theorist Jordan Hall / Greenhall put it beautifully, is that we kind of we only have this much time before civilization as we know it will collapse because of all these kind of stresses. And the UN gives us 10 to 12 years, but now there's reports that was saying that was a little kind of hopeful,
optimistic,
a little bit optimistic, that it wasn't considering the domino effect.
Things accelerate. We're discovering that already. Everything's accelerating.
Yeah.
So basically, it's an all hands on deck moment for any media creators, and that's why we're now getting this information out there, teaching classes at campuscoevolve.org, and Conscious Good Network will have a class as well.
So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to harness the power of propaganda, media making, which has been developed over the last 100 and something years, with the advances that we have now from big data and all that. Now, all of that is already affecting our consciousness, but we're not consciously using it to help us evolve in a healthy way. So what we are calling on everyone to do who is interested in media, who is a media maker, to upgrade your consciousness so you can do this. And we're putting together the tools and techniques that can help you. I studied with some of the masters in cinema who come from that tradition, and I try to share that with everybody, and have studied with some of the leaders in the field of consciousness and bringing all that. We're trying to bring in everything we have, all the tools we have, and integrate it into a system, a methodology that you can use to help you to kind of see the area you want to target, understand what you're trying to do, who you're trying to reach, how they communicate, how they understand, and how you can communicate to them, and how you could do it effectively. So that's kind of what we're trying to do. We're trying to get this out there as much as we can so that we can use our technologies to accelerate ourselves so that we're at the point to make the transition that Albert Einstein talks about. You cannot solve a problem from the consciousness that created it.
Yep.
So we are now called, we have these problems that our consciousness, our current state of consciousness as a collective has created. And the only way out of it is to make a shift. And the only way to make that shift fast enough is on a bigger scale. And the only way to do that is with our technologies.
With our tools and media and technologies.
So, I mean, contact us, take courses, ask questions, reach out to us. We're here to help. This is all hands on deck.
Everyone in the world, global.
Yeah.
Yep. Peace out.